Support comes from Thomas Nelson Community College, now becoming Virginia Peninsula Community College, the first choice to start a bachelor's degree since tuition is one-third the cost of four-year schools. More at tncc.edu.
Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, carrying out your charitable wishes forever. Whether it's helping shelter animals, feeding the homeless, enhancing the arts, or supporting students. Learn more at leaveabequest.org.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'm Barbara Hamley. In my humble opinion, people fall into one of three major categories when it comes to talking about race. They either avoid the conversation at all costs, they use the conversation as a weapon to belittle and shame, or they engage, but only until it gets too uncomfortable. But if we don't talk about race, then we deprive ourselves of the opportunity to learn, engage, and grow as a society. So, what is the right way to talk about race and racial issues? Some advice coming up next on Another View, right after this national, regional, and local news from NPR and WHRO News.
Discussing today's topics from an African-American perspective, this is Another View.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Hamley. You know, we are all about making sure that you stay healthy, both mentally and physically, and to that end, there is a community health and wellness fair. It's called Rock the Lot 2022. I like that. Maintaining your health and wellness, and it is sponsored by New Genesis Baptist Church and Eastminster Presbyterian Church in Virginia Beach. It's going to be located at 3229 McDonald Road. It is this Saturday from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. And the goal is to provide mental and health-related resources to our community members to achieve a healthier mind and body. And so they're going to have door prizes, kids activities, Zumba fitness, food trucks, and a whole lot of other things. And in addition, they're also going to be giving out free food, and it is free and open to everyone. So there are lots of organizations that will be there that will have lots of information for you. So come on out and enjoy the Community Health and Wellness Fair at 3229 McDonald Road in Virginia Beach. It's this Saturday, April 23rd from 10 until 1. So it may be hard for you to believe, but there are people who wish that Another View did not exist. A more frequent than I would like comment is, quote, if you stop talking about race, then we wouldn't have any racial problems. Though I wish it were that simple, that we could solve our racial differences by simply not talking about them, that's a fantasy. We have to talk about it, but in a way that is constructive and impactful, in a way that allows us to break through the uncomfortable so we can move to empathy, compassion, and understanding. So how do we do it? Relationship expert and human interaction consultant, Dr. Alvean Lyons, joins me with some thoughts. Hi, Alvean. Welcome back.
Hey.
So last week, there was an incident on the show, and those of you who are regular listeners know that your humble host got triggered.
Indeed.
By a call where a gentleman claimed that part of the violence that is happening in our communities is because so many of our children are, quote, illegitimate. And you had a very thoughtful response. Dawn had a thoughtful response, and I think I recovered quickly enough to have
You did. You sure
thoughtful response too. But you know what it made me realize is that even in this space, you know, all the diversity training that I do and so forth, that it is still, there are certain words or certain things that can happen that will trigger us in the racial conversation. Why is it so hard to talk about race?
So part of it is because of what race represents inside of America, right? It would be easier to talk about something if it had been a equitable experience for all parties involved, whether that's equally fantastic or equally terrible or whatever that is, that we at least were sharing the same landscape inside of the experience. But particularly in America, because of our history, there is a lot of trauma and hurt that's associated with that. And the way in which race has played out in economics and opportunity and oppression, and the list goes on and on, injustice, it is hard to have a conversation about something that has so many emotions tied to it without feeling anything when having that conversation, whether it is the anger or the rage that lives just beneath the surface for some of us, whether it's the fear or the pain, whether it's the, I don't want to step into a hornet's nest, I don't want to blow up a landmine by saying the wrong thing, I don't want to come across as a racist if I ask the wrong question or use the wrong phraseology. There's so many hot button spots, there's so many potential things that could create triggers that it's hard to have a conversation about something like that.
So the people who come up to me and say, if you just stop talking about it, it'll go away. It'll be fine.
No. So, and the reason I say no is that racism is an illness of consciousness. Okay. So if you think of it almost like a disease, so to speak, it's its own human cancer. So assuming that being true, let's step away from that for a second and just look at it as a cancer. If I talk about curing cancer, it neither reduces or changes the amount of cancer that exists right now. But what it does do is allow us to collectively be more conscious of the presence of this illness and to be collectively thinking about the treatment of that illness, okay? So for someone to say that when we talk about racism, we're basically spreading it, is like saying that if we discuss cancer, everybody's going to end up with cancerous cells in their body. You can't catch racism in that kind of way, right? You can be exposed to it. You can choose whether or not you internalize it. That is your choice, but it is not something that is contagious in a way that having a mere discussion about it means that it's going to expand.
In a lot of African American households, since Another View focuses from an African American perspective, I'm going to say, and I may, I don't know how many, but I would say the majority of Black households have to have conversation about race for safety, as opposed to just in general. That is not necessarily the experience of our white brothers and sisters. Right. And a lot of them don't have the conversation. What would you say to them to help them understand why it's so critical for the Black family to talk about what has happened in this country, what's happening now, and how to navigate so that they can stay safe?
Well, I would say that it is not that different than if any of us decided that we were going to uproot today and go live in Japan. We would have to learn the culture of the space that we live inside of, right? And the fact that we speak English as our original language, we might be learning another language, that being Japanese. We would have to also learn the customs of that environment. We had to learn what is right and what's not right for the culture. We would have to, there's so many things we would have to learn that it would be natural for an American family to be talking about their American experience inside their household in order to prepare the family to navigate that cultural experience when they come out of that household and exist inside of this broader foreign culture, so to speak. Well, for families of color, it's not really any different, or Black families, right? We have a cultural experience sitting inside of another culture. And there are certain things that are true about our experiences as we have to navigate the broader cultural nuances, rules, and requirements.
But a lot of white people say, the experience is the American experience. So therefore, we all have the same experience.
Right.
We know that's not true.
Right.
But I'm getting to the point of why people have such difficulty wanting to advance a conversation that really is necessary and needs to happen.
Well, then, I mean, when someone says something like that, you have to think about, well, what does America mean to you? Because there is not a single experience as an American. I mean, women make 70 cents on a dollar in America. So white women and white men are not even having the same experience inside of America. So the reality is that we are all having slightly different experiences at best and significantly different experiences at worst inside of the same space. So we're going to be talking about this from different angles and different perspectives. And it's not just race that makes it different, but race is a significant layer relative to the American experience. And then we will also say America is people refer to it as a melting pot. I don't know that I would call it per se that, we're more like a salad.
Yeah, because it doesn't melt.
Yeah, like
a melting pot indicates that everything is going to eventually
kind of
come together and
coalesce,
blend together. Right.
But the truth is we are delicious together, but we exist in a lot of our own independent identity. Right. So, and there's nothing wrong with that. And that's the thing that we have to work very hard to do as humans, to not see different as deficient, to not see sameness as security. That the idea is that if we're really going to have a healthy American experience, and I say that in air quotes, it is to make room and space for us each to be able to navigate the world as we do, and that not be a threat to anyone else in so doing. So my love of my experience or your love of yours, the challenge I have in my experience, or the challenge you may have in yours, we don't have to compete over who has more pain, who has it better, who has it not. But we don't have to compete over that. It's not a trauma Olympics. It is okay for us to just be able to acknowledge that we have had different experiences. And as a human race, our goal is to have the healthiest collective experiences. But in order to have that, I don't have to ask you to deny your truth to be able to do that. And that is the human element of it all. The problem in America is that we have allowed race to elevate above humanity, that our humanness seems to come secondary to our race. But if the human experience is to care for my brother, to care for my neighbor, to want good for one another, if that was our primary identity, we'd have less difficulty having conversations around these other things that make us different.
Yeah. A lot of times when the conversation starts out about a racial difference or something that has to do with racism, the other person will change the topic. Well, what about LGBTQI plus? What about QIA plus? What about disability? What about gender? What about, and they would throw other things in and have a long conversation about that because it is less threatening.
Yeah. Yeah. And sometimes it's also the thing that I can relate better to, right? So our natural inclination very often is to have conversations inside of spaces that we can put handles on this. We can be part of this conversation. I can relate in some way. My best friend, my sister, my aunt is part of the LGBTQ community. My brother, my father, whatever that might be. And so it's easier to have a conversation inside of almost if you were playing sports, you're on, home turf, than to have a conversation in visitor space, right? Because I don't know how to navigate that space as well. And I'm more afraid of what could happen inside of that space. And my fears and concerns, my natural inclination is to play to the strength in the communication. And that's inside of what I can relate to. And quite frankly, very often when I have conversations about difficult things, I will take it out of race. so that we can discuss this thing and then reintroduce race to it and realize that it's not as threatening and fearful as it may seem to be. Race doesn't have to be the ultimate boogeyman in a conversation when the people inside of that conversation are more interested in understanding each other than trying to convince the other person that you need to be parroting what I'm saying. I want to hear my thoughts out of your mouth. That is not real communication and real exchange. Real exchange allows for me to have my experience and you to have yours, and I can respect it and I can appreciate it and I can value you for it, but I'm not trying to convince you of something. I just want you to be able to hear me and it be okay that this is real for me.
And to not be afraid to ask questions to follow up if you don't understand. Because that's the other piece I hear a lot of, well, I'm afraid to ask the question. Or if I ask this question, it might be the wrong question. And so therefore, but if you're going to have an authentic conversation with someone on any topic, I don't think you necessarily are thinking to yourself, well, should I ask that question? Because maybe it's not the right question. But when it comes to a racial conversation, it just seems like everything becomes personified in terms of how gently I need to step, you know, instead of being authentic.
It's the landmines.
It's the landmines,
most people are trying to avoid the landmines.
Can you think of an example of a conversation you may have had with someone? Maybe not tell us their names or anything, but
I mean, like I have very diverse friendships. You know, some of my closest friends look nothing like me. We don't share the same culture. We don't share the same gender. We don't share the same generation. I mean, one of my best friends is almost 30 years my senior and very conservative and vanilla and beautiful. And I love him, you know, and we come from very, very different worlds, but we created intentionally safe space to have conversations about things that, quite frankly, most people don't have the guts to talk about. And so we would sit for hours and discuss the differences around even our political positions. He voted for Trump. I did not. You know, like, and not just because I'm Black, but I had lots of reasons in which I did not feel safety in that vote for me personally. I'm not judging somebody else who did. I just couldn't do it, you know, and we talked about that. And one of the things that had to be very important for us is I had to decide, and he had to decide, that you don't care or love me less as a byproduct of the differences in the way that we view this world. But I love you so much as my friend that I want to understand the way that you have experienced the world versus the way that I do. And it has made our friendship incredibly rich because it is safe space. And very often we don't allow for safe space one with another. And inside safe space, you can make mistakes, but you default to the love that exists inside of the relationship. That I am trusting in the fact that you didn't say this to hurt me. You said this because this is all you know or understand, and you want to engage, to perhaps consider a different perspective or even change your own. But if it's not safe enough to do that, then we're not going to have a real conversation, and you're actually not going to ask me anything real.
And actually, then if you have that type of authentic conversation, then you can also say, explain to me why what I said was offensive to you or caused you pain.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And the other thing, when you were talking about, you know, you can just ask the question and people can, you know, why don't you just ask the question? And a lot of times it's because if you think about relationships like a bank account, there's not enough money in that account for me to make the withdrawal of my error. Right. So I don't know you well enough. We haven't spent enough time together. We haven't had enough experiences together for me to trust that if I ask this question that may be considered dumb or racist or obnoxious or whatever it is, offensive in some way, that my question might be a $200 question, but there's only $50 in our relational account. So I'm going to overdraw this account just that fast because our relationship is more superficial than what this question could handle. So, and for some of us who are in the business of this work, you know, the reconciliation, the building of bridges to find more space together than apart, you have to actually make deposits in the account for yourself, knowing that somebody else is going to make withdrawals. And what that means is that I am not waiting for the other party to have put enough in this account for you to say or ask whatever you're going to say or ask. I have to fund my own account because I know you're going to have to make withdrawals. But I have already decided that is okay. Right? But that I can't expect that from the average person. But this is the work that I do. So it's a decision that has to be made that I am creating. You are coming into this bank and you already have money in your account. And then over time through our relationship, you're able to deposit more. You're able to make withdrawals. But I've already decided that there's basically overdraft protection in this account from the beginning to ensure that we never go below zero.
440-2665. That's area code 757. I keep forgetting we're in this 10-digit number now. 757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. Have you thought about having a serious conversation about race and you may be afraid to do it? Would you like some tips on what you need to do if you find yourself in a conversation that you weren't anticipating? 757-440-2665, 1-800-940-2240. Sarah joins us from Onancock on the Eastern Shore. Hi, Sarah. You're on the air.
Hello. I am calling to respond to an image that you used at the beginning, Alvean, about about the melting pot and the salad bowl,
right.
where in the melting pot everything is a blob and it's not distinguishable from anything else. And then at the other end of the spectrum, the salad bowl, no ingredient affects the flavor of any other ingredient and everything remains freestanding and separate. Well, there's a third one that I learned from a pastor from Kenya, which is the stew pot, where the carrot is still a carrot, but it takes on the flavor of the meat and it gives flavor to the potato. So that each ingredient keeps its own essence while sharing with the others and receiving from them. And I just love that image.
I think it's a beautiful image. And it's interesting that you would say that because I had considered mentioning it, but also wanted to acknowledge that it's okay. It really is okay to be totally separate and be delicious together still, you know, that
because even when you eat a salad, if you have the different flavors, but the flavors coming together is what makes it good.
Yeah, like that everything brings something fabulous to it.
Absolutely.
But I totally appreciate that, Sarah.
Yeah. Thank you, Sarah, for the call. I appreciate that. So, Alvean, what work do we need to do on ourselves before we try to engage in conversation with others when it comes to talking about race?
That is such an awesome question. And what I would say is that the first thing that we have to do, and this is why I take it always back to the human thing, right, is if I flipped this experience, what would I want from someone else if I were the one asking the difficult question, the sensitive question? If I were the one that made the mistake, if I were the one that stepped on the landmine, what would I hope would be someone else's response? And that doesn't mean that there aren't consequences to saying certain kinds of things. You are going to trigger people sometimes. You are going to offend people sometimes. But the reality is that we cannot expect from someone else something that we are unwilling to give ourselves. And I'll tell you when this really became real for me. One of my best friends, who happened to have been named Sarah, passed away a couple of years ago. And when she passed away, I did not realize, one, how important our relationship was for reasons that I had not considered. I needed, and she was, as you guys always hear me say, vanilla or white, right? And I needed that space inside of my world. I needed what she represented. I needed her different, very deeply in my life. I needed to be able to talk about things from someone who had a completely different perspective on life than I had. And I needed to know that you can love and be loved and see and be fully seen by someone who completely does not understand what it is you have experienced inside of your world, and you find a place of love and you expand that place. Our relationship was very much that way. When she passed away, one of her final decisions is that if anything happened to her husband, they wanted me to raise their son. Now, that means that I have this adorable, freckled, very pale-skinned, ginger-haired child that I would be raising. And even though, thank God, her husband is healthy and well and doing fantastic, it made me think about how different the conversations might have to be in my home if I were raising, his name is Sam, if I were raising Sam. Because there's a luxury of homogeneousness that you can say certain kinds of things and do certain kinds of things, and it's just understood as love because we all share the same culture. That if someone else lived in your home that represents another culture, how would it change the way you had to have that conversation? And having to think about what that meant made me think about how often there are things that I do and I say that would actually be offensive if I flip it on its head and it was happening to me in the reverse. And I know that I don't mean them other than love and playfulness. If I don't mean them with venom, can I assume that somebody else doesn't mean them with venom when it happens in the opposite direction? So the humanness is about, in terms of the work we have to do, can we give each other the grace to acknowledge that maybe, just maybe, they mean it as innocently as we might have meant it if it was the opposite situation.
If you're just joining us, we're talking about how to have constructive conversations about race with relationship expert and human interaction consultant, Dr. Alvean Lyons. 757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Something else that struck me as you talked about Sam, if he were to come into your house, I wonder what the conversation would be that you would have with Sam about being a male and growing up and going out into the world versus
what I tell my son,
what you tell your son.
And it is a bit different, and I would have to, and in addition to that, I would have to talk to Sam about how he navigates Black space. And that is different also. There are certain things that he naturally would not think about that are cultural requirements inside of communities of color. Like, as silly as this sounds, don't walk into a room full of Black people and not acknowledge everybody inside of that room. Okay? As crazy as that may sound, that is a thing for people of color. You walk into the barbershop, say, good evening, everybody.
That's right.
And you don't know any of these strangers, but it's considered socially appropriate to do so. You speak, and you're not, as a Black child, you're expected to speak first to acknowledge adults, where that is not necessarily the case for white children. There are certain things that are just part of the culture, just like I was talking about. If we go to Japan, there are certain things that are part of the culture. We all have different cultures, and there's nothing wrong with that. But the job is to teach each other how to be multilingual inside of our cultures so we could all be successful in the salad or the stew that is America.
440-2665, 1-800-940-2240. George joins us from Norfolk. Hi, George. You're on the air.
Yes, hello.
Hi.
I just wanted to say that as a middle-aged white guy who's been studying race relations for 40 years or so, that your guest today is one of the most articulate, insightful, and effective speakers on this topic that I have ever heard. And if we could bottle what she's got, this country would be a much better place.
Oh,
and that's
thanks,
really all
George.
I wanted to say.
Thank you, George, for the call. I appreciate that. I think he likes the way that you're carrying that. Absolutely. So we all know that bias and microaggressions, all that play into conversations. I can remember when George Floyd happened, and I received a letter from a listener who wanted to know, what should I do? And how do I have a conversation with a relative who is totally not it's totally not anti-racist. Okay. And, but when I did not respond immediately because I was dealing with my own feelings about what happened with George Floyd and so forth. And I even asked the listeners on the air to just give me a little bit and I'll get to you. Received another letter from the same person, totally and completely angry and laid me out because I did not respond in a timely fashion to her. You know, as we look at these I consider that a macroaggression as opposed to a microaggression. But, you know, but my point being, sometimes we present ourselves in such a way that we demand things from others that is inappropriate. And how do you navigate that conversation? I eventually got back to her and I answered her question. My
when
choice,
you were ready.
Yes, my choice was to just answer the questions. So I did not deal with the feelings and the energy and all of that. She had very specific questions in her correspondence, and I answered those questions. But it bothered me.
Oh, of course it does. And it makes sense that it would bother you because what happened inside of that space is that she forgot that you were a human too, right? And that as she was trying to navigate her big feelings, she had not considered the depth of yours. And the thing about the human condition is that we tend to be naturally selfish. You know, it's the what's in it for me. It's the what about me? We are naturally selfish creatures, and we actually have to grow against that gravitational pull towards selfishness and self-centeredness. All she could feel inside of that moment is what her need was. It hadn't crossed her mind that you had one inside of that moment either. And sometimes the selfishness that may be inside of a space can easily be a barrier to productivity. But we each get to make a decision, which you did, about whether or not we're going to step past that initial display of selfishness to move to a productive space or not. You would have had the right inside of that moment to choose not to engage. And there would have been nothing wrong if that's what you decided to do because you needed to take care of you in that moment. But the fact that you chose to move past the initial selfish act, to make sure that you took care of you first, because if your glass is empty, you can't pour water into anyone else's, right? And in that analogy, might I also say, and if your water is dirty and someone else needs water from you, you are only going to spill dirt. No matter how loving and generous you are, if you have not worked through your trauma, it's like having a cup of dirty water and someone else needs something from you. And in your generosity, trying to do good, you are spilling dirt because you've not taken care of yourself. It is the right thing to do to work through our stuff so that we share purpose, but not transfer pain, right? So we all have to make a decision inside of these moments. And inside of that, I would say, make sure you're okay first. Make sure that your water is clean and then pour out. If you discover you don't have any to give, it's okay to not give. It's okay. And we have to be all right with that. But we're so used to the demand culture, the microwave culture, I need it now kind of thing that we forget how human we are.
You know, when I was thinking also, and you and I were talking about this before the show started, but when the word illegitimate, which was my trigger last week, was brought up, it made me think about Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson,
KBJ,
and and the what she had to steel herself for. Because she knew it was coming, you know, and is there a difference between knowing it's coming and being prepared to respond versus having a conversation and all of a sudden,
boom,
there it is.
Yes. And in both of those scenarios, you're still a human being. Okay. So it doesn't mean that in either scenario, you're not going to have feelings, right? But it is to say that if you know you've stepped into the octagon you are prepared that there's likely to be a punch, a kick, or some kind of interaction that's going to happen that could be painful. That was part of your agreement when you stepped into the octagon, right? But if I sit down for a cup of coffee and get punched, I was not prepared for that, right? And so I lovingly call her KBJ because I just think that she's so awesome. So what KBJ experienced was stepping into the octagon. She had to be a well-prepared judicial athlete to navigate what was getting ready to take place. She knew she was a contender. She knew that this was going to be a battle. Her ability to resist the natural inclination towards being triggered that is completely human is a byproduct of appropriate preparation, right? Mm-hmm. That's one space that is very different than you sit down, for a meeting at the office and somebody comes in and says, just dropped my kid off at school and the line was so long, but watching all these little moms drop off their little illegitimate kids drove me crazy. You're not expecting that. So how you're going to respond and feel inside of that moment may be very different. Now, you may have the skill set to be able to swallow that fire and to be able to respond with something different, but you were not expecting it. Mm-hmm. So people cannot anticipate that every human being is supposed to respond like KBJ did, nor are they supposed to expect that every human being is supposed to respond,
that go off and go crazy.
Right.
Yeah. But when you find yourself in a situation where you kind of gobsmacked without the expectation, should you step back and take a break? I mean, some tips on just in general, because people find themselves getting so wrapped up in their emotion that the conversation goes way left or, very quickly. And so what are some things that even if you take a breath for 10 seconds and just kind of separate a little bit, maybe?
So I would definitely say the very first thing one needs to do is pause. Pause is the very first thing you do, because reflexive responses, particularly when you're not trained, are rarely going to be the best response. Yeah. Rarely, right? So pause for a second. And much like if you got into a car accident or you fell down or you tripped, you take that moment to figure out, am I hurt? Is anything broken? Right? Mm-hmm. Like where am I right this second before I take my very next step? Am I injured? Because if I know that I am injured, my response is likely to include pain. So we've got to pause for a second. And in recognizing, let's say, for instance, you actually are injured, then you have to ask yourself, am I capable of being able to still move forward despite the pain, to respond productively? Am I just angry? Because sometimes that's exactly what we do. You hurt me, so I want to hurt you back. Hurt people, hurt people. Is that what I want to do? Or is there or do I need to remove myself from the situation? So 1 is pause, 2, do an assessment. And based on what the assessment is of where you are, 3 would be then act. And that action could be to move forward. It could be to stand still, or it could be to retreat. And all of those are appropriate responses.
Based on you. 757-440-2665, 1-800-940-2240. Yvette joins us from Portsmouth. Hi, Yvette. You're on the air.
Yes. Thank you, ladies, for a great conversation, one that we definitely need to have.
Thank you.
I just wanted to share with you all that Hampton Roads Community Foundation did an unmasking several years ago, but then COVID kind of changed the direction in which we could go. But the people that were sitting at my table, if you will, we continued that conversation. We called ourselves Table 1.
I love that.
We talk probably maybe twice a month or however schedules allow. And we join in. We're generational. We're vanilla and chocolate. We're conservative or liberal. And we just try to stay informed. We share our story. What was your first encounter with race? But we've created a safe place, a very safe place. And that's the only way I think we're going to have that conversation. And I just want to thank you all for continuing that, because for me, for so long, nobody wanted to talk about race. I say a salute to George Floyd. I mean, he opened up a door that allowed us to really feel free to talk. And I can't commend you all enough. And Another View was just great. And your speaker today, Ms. Lyons,
thank you.
You're another Miss Brown Jackson, if you will.
Thank you.
Thank you,
I appreciate you.
We appreciate it.
I just love our Another View audience. They're just some of the best humans, I tell you. And not just because they love me back. You know, I just love them.
Let's talk to Jenna in Virginia Beach. Hi, Jenna. You're in the air.
Hi, Barbara.
Hi.
Good afternoon, Dr. Lyons.
Hi, Jenna.
Hi. I live in a very small community of Virginia Beach that is very racist, and they still hang Confederate flags out on their porch, and they threaten our mail carrier. And my question is, in this environment, sorry, I'm emotional.
It's okay.
No, it's okay. Take your time.
Thank you. In this environment, how do I, as a white woman with white children, make an impact? And oh my gosh, I'm so emotional.
Don't worry about it. That's actually a beautiful thing. It means that you feel
and you care.
That is a beautiful thing. We're patient. Go ahead.
How do I make a change? Like, how do I shift the environment just being one person?
So here's what I will say to you, Jenna, is that one, you are not responsible for fixing everything around you. You're responsible for how you lead in the things that belong to you, right? So your household is yours. That belongs to you. How you talk to your kids, how you talk to your partner, how you talk to your friends, the spaces that are most intimate to you, you are dropping a significant pebble in a water that allows for that ripple of inclusion and thoughtfulness and love and consideration to be able to expand. And that is the most important work we can do. Everybody's job is not to fix everyone, right? Your job is not to necessarily walk up and down your street with the Black Lives Matter flag and, I need to change the world t-shirt. That is not necessarily your job. But we have to know that conversations are action. The conversations that you are having in the places with people who trust you enough to be open, who believe in your relationship and your connection, and will truly listen. And inside of those spaces, you are spreading opportunities for inclusion, diversity, equity, love, whatever that is sincere to who you are acting. I know it could be profoundly overwhelming to discover that a world that may look like you is not consistent with your heart and your desire for what this America or this, smaller community ultimately is supposed to be. But you have not failed, and you are not abdicating your responsibility as a citizen by not being able to change all of them. You are owning the spaces that you can control. And if given the opportunity to talk to someone and they say, I love the Confederate flag and I don't give about blah, 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 blah. That's a great opportunity to say, that's really sad because I really thought so well of you. I always saw you as ABC kind of person. Be the encourager, plant the seed of the vision of what you would hope that person would have been. And to say, I honestly am surprised that you would say something like that because it just doesn't seem to match who I thought you would be. We are better than those kinds of thoughts and views. We are better than A, B, and C. And you can speak to that in a way that doesn't have to be aggressive. You don't have to put yourself in a situation where it has to be, a fight. Sometimes it's just a seed that is planted, and you may plant a seed and somebody else may water it and somebody else may put sunshine on it, and collectively change happens. But only be responsible for what you can be responsible for, Jenna. Don't take on the whole world. Take on what belongs to you. And if you can do that with love, and you can do that with sincerity, and you can do that with commitment, when you can own the condition of your home, you are changing your community. Just one relationship at a time. And I appreciate your tears and the sound in your voice, because that says that this is not what happens to them. You are internalizing the fact that when we choose hatred, it happens to all of us. We all get sick when we allow that. I am grateful that there is someone like you that really wants for us to be healthy as a collective.
Yeah.
You are doing good.
Thank you, Jenna. I hope that helped.
Good life advice, even. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much, Jenna, for the call. I appreciate that. You know, Alvean, and maybe it's because I'm in the bubble of people who listen to Another View who really want to know. But I do believe that in this country that there are truly people who mean well and who want the best and who want all of us to get together. But we don't hear them. We hear the vitriol. We hear the other side. We hear those who would rather wave that Confederate flag and would rather keep things stirred up. I don't understand why the good guys, if you will, the people who really want this to work, why aren't we rising up and squashing that? I mean, what is that dynamic that allows this to continue?
So it's funny that you would say that, because I went through a horrible professional experience at a company not too long ago in which I thought that the good guys would speak up for what was not okay, you know, and race was unequivocally a factor inside of that situation. And what I discovered is a couple of things. One, that sometimes the good guys don't know how to do it. It's not that they don't want to, they don't know how to go about it because they've never had to before, right? Like when you are in a homogenous space, everybody looks the same. It's not a problem until somebody different comes into the space.
Yeah.
So you don't have practice at this already, you know, so that's item number one. Item number two, it's scary to be on your own because sometimes the sharks turn on you for wanting something better for all of us. And it takes courage to stand up. You know, it takes courage to be isolated. And the other thing too is humans are designed for connection. We do not like to have to be ostracized for virtually anything. And sometimes doing the right thing means that you have to be prepared to be ostracized. And most people fear that, because we were made for togetherness. So people will be quiet in order to not be alone. We know if we take this out of race, we know there are people who stay in unhealthy relationships every day to avoid not being alone. This is really not any different. There's so much humanness in the things that happen that if we separate it from race, we can relate. It's when you put race on it, suddenly we stop being able to see the human component inside of it, because race is such a painful thing inside of this America that it changes how we look at stuff.
And it's not only just because of interactions between two people or between a group of people, but it's insidious in our in our policies, in our laws, in our institutions. It's everywhere. Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. I didn't know if there was another call. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. We only have about 5 minutes left, though. So you know what? So let me ask you this. Another thing that I hear, people who would rather avoid the race space, they say, well, it's not about race, it's about socioeconomics. It's those people versus, but you successful Black folk, you know, y'all don't have any problems. You have no racial problems, you know. Myth or truth?
Myth. Total myth. And that, for instance, when I walk down the street, people don't know I'm a doctor. They don't know I have 2 doctorate degrees. They don't know what my socioeconomics are. They just see a woman of color, you know, so that's
and there's an assumption.
And there are assumptions associated with that, right? You know, they see me with my kids. I don't always wear my wedding ring. So do you assume I have a spouse or not? Did I have these kids inside of marriage or not? You know, depending upon what car I get out of, what does that say about what my life is, what I'm wearing? If you catch me in sweats and sneakers, what do you assume about me as a byproduct of that? My hair's up in a ponytail, whatever that may be. And so and I have very good friends that are police officers, both Black and white, and you will hear them say that when you take off the uniform, you go back to whatever your regular identity is, whether that is as a white man or whether that is as a black man. And to be both black and blue is its own set of experiences that is different than being white and blue. And that is not, and let me be clear, I love my friends who are officers. Let me be crystal clear. Good officers hate bad officers too, okay? So it's not, we can't do a broad brush,
right,
you know?
Exactly.
But even inside of those spaces, they acknowledge that when you step out of your title, when you step out of, if you're a doctor and you take off your, you know, your white coat, you're just Bob, you know, like, so the reality is that we don't get to step away from the things that are already prejudged about us as a byproduct of our deeper melanin. You know, like that still comes with us no matter how accomplished you are. And quite frankly, it's a very interesting space to be successful and brown because of what comes with that, you know, and I know we don't have forever to talk about it. We'll talk about it on a different day.
Exactly.
But even
the whole
that
idea
has
about
complexities.
the are they qualified?
Yes.
You know, and that whole
and the
conversation
feeling of having
goes
to
on.
be perfect in order to just be considered average, and all kinds of things that we navigate both in macro and microaggressions is a very interesting thing to have to deal with. And some of us just decide, I have to stay focused on what I'm here to do, despite what's happening around me. But it doesn't mean that those things aren't happening. It just means that we are succeeding in spite of, not because of. Right.
Last question in the last 2 minutes that we have left. Will there ever come a time where we won't have to have a conversation about race?
Maybe when all of America is tan. Right. That's why I love diversity, you know, like, but I don't know that the thing about humans is we like hierarchies. So we will just find something else to be the new race issue when we finally don't have race to talk about anymore because we all look similar. We'll find something else. Because that's what we do. When you drop humans into a space, they almost instinctively start to create hierarchical systems. So there's a thing about what's innate to us that we want order. When you see certain things, we organize them. These go here and these go here. When you put clothes in a closet, some people who are a little more organized than others, you know, it goes from white to black through your closet. We like to organize things because our brains like structure. So I would say to you that it might not be race we are talking about anymore, but there will be a new race issue that we will utilize to create yet again our new version of hierarchy. And I don't think it all goes away until we get to heaven.
And you know what? And we will have you here to help us navigate it. Absolutely.
And I would love to do that.
And that's Dr. Alvean Lyons. Thank you, Alvean, as always. I always enjoy our conversations. Absolutely. And thank you, audience, for the pleasure of your company during this last hour. And I hope something resonated with you so that you will be prepared the next time you find yourself in a conversation about race. Do me a favor and please share this show with a friend. You can go to anotherviewradio.org and download the podcast. You can find us on Facebook, and I'm on Twitter at Barbara Ham Lee. And just to remind you again about the Community Health and Wellness Fair, Rock the Lot 2022, Maintaining Your Health and Wellness. So this is being sponsored by New Genesis Baptist Church and Eastminster Presbyterian Church, and it is going to be held this Saturday from 10 until 1. It is free and open to everyone. And the address is 3229 McDonald Road in Virginia Beach. They're going to have all kinds of door prizes, lots of things for the kids to do. So if you're looking for something for your children to do, we always look for that. Come on out and join them. Next week on Another View, it's Another View on Health. Dr. Keith Newby will be here. And is it time for that second booster shot? And what about this mask thing in public transportation? Let's talk about it. Our theme music is an original composition created especially for Another View by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Todd Washburn is our audio engineer. And Dr. Barry Graham answered our phones. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Practice kindness. It will make our world a better place. And let's get together again next Thursday at noon for another view.
Support comes from Thomas Nelson Community College, now becoming Virginia Peninsula Community College, the first choice, whether starting your bachelor's degree or advancing your career. More at tncc.edu.
Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, partnering with donors from all walks of life to improve southeastern Virginia through grants, scholarships, and leadership initiatives. Learn more at hamptonroadscf.org.